Hi, this is Cheryl Gallant, your Conservative Member of Parliament for the hard-working people of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. Food. Without meeting this most basic need, the success of any operation can be compromised. Now, if one thing demonstrates Trudeau's determination to demoralize the troops to the point where they disband on their own, it has to be the changes to the way soldiers are paid. Just after Parliament rose for Easter, the revelation that soldiers in theatre were left to fend for themselves, foraging for food surfaced. Generally, a mess kitchen, including a cook, deploys with the troops, but with the race-based quotas to fill the ranks, it's much more difficult to recruit. Instead, soldiers have been frequenting local restaurants in another country with the anticipation of being reimbursed by the government. The families of the soldiers have been forced to do without in order to ensure their loved ones overseas get the calories to do the job the Canadian government asked them to do. That meant no Easter for some of the families trying to keep the home fires burning. This is in addition to the government driving up the price of food here at home through its carbon tax. It's no wonder that Canadian Armed Forces members are quitting the military the very first chance they get. The Liberals and the other Socialist Party and the costly coalition are intentionally dismantling our military, the same way Trudeau Sr. did. The progressive left loves conspiracy theories. One of their favorites is the dog whistle conspiracy theory. The socialists believe conservatives have a secret dictionary filled with special code words. They call these magic words dog whistles because only certain people can hear the meaning. For example, progressives claim the word freedom is actually code for white supremacy. The truth is, the radical left is engaged in something we like to call accusation in a mirror. That's what psychologists call projection. Progressives use coded language to conceal their true intent. They also use socialist jargon to exclude people. They do this so often they assume that everyone else does this too. Occasionally, they slip up and speak the truth out loud. This month, we got a great example of them speaking out loud from Health Canada. Rather than focusing on the serious tuberculosis outbreak in northern Canada, the public health bureaucrats decided they needed to conduct a study on what public health bureaucrats thought about climate change and public health. Of course, this being the Trudeau Liberals, the public health agency outsourced the study to a consulting group of ultra-woke academics. These consultants then drew up a list of public health experts who checked all the appropriate ethnic and gender boxes. These consultants conducted interviews and focus groups with hand-picked experts, then summarized what they heard in an 80-page report. Here it is. The title of the report is What We Heard: Perspectives on Climate Change and Public Health. I first learned about this study from Blacklock's reporter. Their headline was, Fed Report Blames Capitalism. Here are some of the quotes they selected. Quote, it's really about the foundations of our society, the capitalist system, the culture of extraction, and we need to change that. Quote, if we don't address capitalism, if we don't address colonialism, racism, the patriarchy, etc., we're going to tread water for a long time until eventually we drown. quote, these core drivers of climate change, extraction, capitalism, and colonialism, were described as the root of polarization and fragmentation witnessed recently in public health, end quote. As shocking as those quotes are, it just scratches the surface. The report calls for a complete reordering of our values, led by these radical socialists. The report authors wrote, quote, many experts we heard from highlighted the importance of shifting dominant societal values and transitioning to health and well-being economies. If meaningful action is to be taken on climate change and adaptation and mitigation, quote, end quote. What are all those societal values? Here's what one expert had to say, quote, ultimately, there are three core values in Western society, and for that matter, in global society, that have to change. One core value is about growth and materialism. The second core value is liberty and individualism, which has to be rethought because the kind of individualism that's preached by neoliberals is part of the problem, end quote. In response to this radical claim that ending poverty and individual liberty are the root of all evil, the report authors wrote, quote, the above noted core values, which are undermining public health and well-being, are known. But public health systems have been successful in reorienting societal values. For example, public health research and communications have changed our societal relationship with tobacco products, end quote. Along with changing society's values on capitalism and liberal democracy, they want to change our relationship with nature. For these radical socialists, terms like decolonization, neoliberalism, and systemic racism are code for dismantling capitalism and democracy. They clearly hate capitalism. It's repeated throughout the document. And this is despite the fact that communist countries are the biggest polluters in the world. The Soviets turned one of the largest lakes on Earth into a radioactive desert. Here in Canada, you can drink the water out of Lake Superior. Our air is cleaner, our water is safer, and our protection of the environment is superior. Despite the reality that socialism is a horror show, these radical socialists live in a fantasy world, and I mean that literally. Here's one more quote from the report your tax dollars paid for. Quote, in Western futurism, we are used to thinking about a dystopian world where, with the impacts of climate change, we wouldn't have access to food anymore. We would be invaded by aliens, or there'd be an apocalypse, or whatever. But Indigenous futurism and Afrofuturism recognizes that we are already living in the apocalypse. We've already lived through an alien invasion that has taken control of our world and destroyed it. Indigenous futurism offers a way of imagining the future without colonization and asking ourselves how we can get there, end quote. Futurism is another socialist code word for science fiction. They can't say science fiction because socialists claim science is a Western way of knowing. These so-called public health experts actually recommend governments integrate Indigenous futurism into policymaking. They've gone from telling us to follow the science to telling us to follow the science fiction. On a previous edition of the Gallant Night News, we showed clips of the Liberal and NDP MPs delivering a petition. The petition called on the government to pass just legislation, just transition legislation. The Petitioners include a list of policy actions, and one of those actions was the wholesale nationalization of our economy. They just want to transition to socialism. The two NDPs were smart enough not to read that part out loud. The Liberal MP, not so much. He said the quiet part out loud. And just like these so-called public experts did in this report, the far left sees climate change as an excuse to push radical socialist policies. You won't hear about this from government-funded media like the CBC. The CBC has already branded opposition to public health-led climate advocacy as a conspiracy theory. Well, don't believe them. The people who brought us COVID lockdowns can't wait to bring in climate lockdowns. Live from Ottawa, this is Cheryl Gallant.